Greetings, friends. Just here to do a short little video today. Just one of those things that are one of these topics that are looming in my head that I think I kind of want to get off my chest. Two things. One, just going to talk about really quickly, and the other one I'll get into a little bit more detail with. The first thing is the whole MOFI thing. I'm so sick of the MOFI thing, to be honest. I mean, there's videos left, right, and center. I know it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. I know a lot of people feel slighted about it, what happened. And I understand that point. I mean, getting lied to is not a fun thing, especially if you're one of these people who invest hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars on MOFI pressings. Maybe I'm not that affected by it because I own one MOFI pressing. For me, the MOFIs were never something that I was interested in because I always kind of had the suspicion that they were not all that they were not, that they weren't what they were, hyped up to be. Now a lot of them sound great, but I was always kind of the thought to buy originals, and that came early from my collecting of Kiss records, and I thank my fellow Kiss collector community because for us this whole thing never affected that community segment, because for us we always kind of pursued original pressings. For us, Kiss original pressings were the way to go, especially for the first 6 Kiss albums. Nobody really sought out the latest reissue of those records. Nobody really gave a shit about those, Sure, when the 2014s came out, yeah, we went and bought them and they sounded fine. They sounded actually really good. But compared to some of the originals, not even close. And we knew that from the very beginning, collecting Kiss records. And some people may say, oh, well, Hotter Than Hell sounds terrible. Yeah, it does, but that's just how the way it was mixed. And, that's just the way the albums sound, But, albums like Destroyer are known to sound fantastic. A lot of those catalogs sound really good, and you've always been told to collect originals. So for me, the MOFI thing was never an issue because, number one, there's never any MOFI Kiss records. Number two, my other band that I really love, which is Yes, there was only one MOFI, I believe, of that, and I think it was Close to the Edge. So again, there was no real attention or lure for me to go get a MOFI. The only one that I own is actually Rick Wakeman's Journey to the Center of the Earth, and that's because I love Rick Wakeman and I heavily collect his records. But you see, there again, I'm not rushing down and saying, is this a digital version of the record? I mean, I don't care. It sounds good, and I have original pressings that even if that Rick Wakeman one, I'm told, because it is an old one, even if that one is an old analog version of it, I'm sorry, the original still sounds better. So go original. That's all I'm going to say for that matter. And I have one more thing to say about that. I heard this on one of the more respected streams, and I really like this guy, Michael 45 RPM. He's a great guy. I've talked to him many times on live streams, and he's a great guy. On his latest stream, he talks about how he's been getting inundated with phone calls from German collectors who are asking if he wants to buy their MOFIs off him. That people are dumping their MOFIs like crazy in Germany. Now, I don't know if this is something that's happening in other parts of the world, but in Germany, apparently, they're dumping them like wildfire. Now, this to me seems ridiculous, okay? Because before this happened, a lot of these people were more than happy to go out and buy 100 MOFIs at top dollar price, and were very happy with them. Now, all of a sudden, this happens. Somebody discovers that they were, using a digital source for a lot of these records, or that there was a digital step in the process of it. And now everybody's crying foul, and suddenly these records are become poisonous now, and we have to ditch them now. This is ridiculous. You liked these records before. If this never came out, what were your thoughts be of it then? I'm going to tell you something right now. When it got announced that it became digital, your records didn't suddenly change in sound overnight. That same record that you went and bought and enjoyed and loved all that time still sounds the same now. And I'll tell you one other thing that I kind of thought about too. Is people are now hunting for the true analog remaster, the AAA version of it. You know what? There are a lot of records out there that are like that, and they sound great. I have a Yes drama, I believe it is. Yeah, that was done by Kevin Gray from the original master tapes, apparently. Does it have a digital step? Who knows? Kevin Gray claims that he doesn't do it, and I'll believe him for now, because to me, honestly, if he didn't, it doesn't matter to me. It still sounds really, really good, that pressing. But I'll tell you one thing: it doesn't sound better than the original. I've heard, and I have a few all analog records that are reissues. Do they sound better than the original? No. So hunt for all you want for those AAA records. I still think that the original pressings will always be better, if mainly because of the fact it's the vision of the artist, what they wanted at the time. When these original records were made, that was what the artist wanted. That was their vision for it. A lot of these remixer people, they don't know what these guys were thinking back 20 years ago or 30 years ago when they were making these records. So that's the end of that discussion for me. Now, the one other thing I wanted to get to, and this is the main heart of my video, is I'm getting the feeling that a lot of these mastering engineers are getting far too much credit, I think, for these records that are coming out. And we're forgetting one of the key people in these records that we all love and talk about: the mixing engineer. Not the mastering engineer, the mixer. Okay? And now I'm going to hear all kinds of reactions, I'm sure, about no. Listen, the mixer has far more influence on the final sound of this album that you guys love than any mastering guy does. Because when you have a console in front of you and you're mixing a multi-track tape, I can take the drums, put the snare up louder, put this louder, drums higher, this lower, vocals straight. And not only that, but there's a part in the song where there's a snare roll. I want to put a phaser on it. Okay, so I set up the effect send. I put the phaser on, and when that part comes up, I turn it, and I take it off, and the snare roll is done. You can do it on a computer now too, on Pro Tools, very easily. You can set these up. My point is, you can fine tune a song to all kinds of different things. If you want to put a delay on 3 words of a vocal, you can do that. If you want to put reverb on just keyboards, a certain reverb, and then put a different kind of reverb on a drum set, you can do that. You can't do any of that when you're mastering. All you can do basically when you're mastering is compress the overall sound. You can EQ the overall sound. You can maybe widen the sound stage using like stereo imaging. Okay. But if you want to add a reverb on it, you're adding reverb on everything. You can't just say, okay, now I want to put a reverb on the, you can't do it. You can't just put it on vocal. It's only on all of it or none of it. This is why I don't understand why people don't clue into this. The amount of things that the mastering guy can do to this is very limited, I know people keep saying, oh, but he's doing with the final icing on the cake for what's coming out of your speakers. Yeah, but you know what? If you were to go to a studio, and I've been to lots of them myself, usually the mixer tries to get the sound as close as how the band wants it as possible. Okay, they don't want to do it. No mixer goes in and says, okay, I'm gonna mix it, and then okay, it's close enough. We'll just let the mastering guy get it to what we want it to sound like. I've never ever heard a mixing engineer do that in my life. Never. Okay. And you won't ever hear one do that. That's just ridiculous, okay? So, and I mean, there's lots of videos for that. Check out Metallica's year and a half in the life of Metallica. When Bob Rock goes into the mastering studio, they're listening back to it with the mastering guy, and they both were saying, "No, this sounds pretty much perfect. Maybe a little bit of bass and a little cut in the bass frequency here, and that's about it." They didn't have to do diddly squat to it. And maybe a lot of these records, they don't have to do a lot to it. Maybe get a little bit of compression, and in the loudness war days, maybe give it a bit more limiting to jack up the volume. But other than that, that's about all that they're pretty much doing. Sure, maybe on jazz records, okay, they might do some more things. Maybe they might add some reverb to a dead sounding room. Or maybe they might be able to EQ it in such a way that it might bring out more of a saxophone from this 4-piece band that's playing. That's great. Because don't forget, these recordings are done to like 2-track tape directly. There's no multi-tracks to be heard of on these recordings, okay? So maybe they have more influence on those recordings, but certainly not on any sort of regular rock, you know, pop music, country, any kind of music you can think of, and even modern jazz. You know, that's probably more multi-track than it ever was before. So, am I making my point clear on this? I think that, you know, I'm not trying to diss the wonderful mastering engineers of the world. In this whole whirlwind of talking about great records, why doesn't anybody talk about the mixing engineers? So you know what? I'm going to list off a bunch of them that I think need to be talked about and need to be on videos here. And some of them have been. I've been looking around, and some of them have been, and even recently. Like, for example, Bob Claremountain. There's a great video out with him now where he sat down with a couple of guys from a really excellent podcast, and they went through a mix of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. They put up all the multi-tracks. They let him hear his raw vocal, showed how he put some reverb on it to make it sound the way it did, the drums, what he did for this and that. Do you want to see a good video? Check that out, okay? It's far more exciting than seeing one guy at a 2-track machine and just listening back to a thing, to a playback, and saying, oh yeah, maybe I'll put a little bit of treble on the overall. You know, great. Those guys have an important job too, yes. And another thing, don't forget, these people that are remastering engineers, okay, sometimes those mastering people are not the same people who cut the lacquers. Don't confuse yourself with that. The people who cut the lacquer sometimes have nothing to do with the mastering of the album itself. Sometimes the mastering person is totally separate from the lacquer cutter. Check that out when you're looking for a record too, because maybe the guy who cuts the lacquers might have more influence on what you like than the actual mastering person. All right. So, but again, I'm going to list off some people that I think deserve attention. Bob Claremountain, Terry Brown, who's done a bunch of Rush albums. He's done some Voivod. He's done a lot of independent prog stuff as well. Bob Ezrin, Tony Visconti, who did a bunch of David Bowie records. Andrew Shepp, who's done everybody and their brother now in the modern era. Chris Lord-Alge, who's probably mixed more #1 songs in the world than anybody else I could think of. Eddie Kramer, who's done Jimi Hendrix, Zeppelin. You know, he's done Kiss stuff. He's done a bunch of stuff. Bob Rock, you know, the Black Album. Hello, you know, he was involved with that. He's involved with Blue Murder. He was involved with some of the later Aerosmith catalog, like Permanent Vacation. Butch Vig, who did Nevermind for Nirvana. Okay, Andy Wallace, who's done so many great albums. He's been involved with mixing, including some of my favorites, like he did Rush's Test for Echo, I believe he mixed. Great stuff. And who can forget Eddie Ufford, who did a bunch of the early Yes albums. He was responsible for the sound of those. And these records, look, Close to the Edge is voted as probably the greatest progressive rock album of all time by numerous magazines and websites, okay? And he was the man who was mixing it. The 16-track tapes were mixed by Eddie Ufford. Nobody talks about who mastered it. Nobody. I've never heard anybody talk about Close to the Edge, man. You got to make sure you get that mastered version by it. No. People just talk about how great the sound of it is, and people always talk about Eddie Ufford. He was considered the 6th member of Yes. That's how closely he worked with them. So, in conclusion, I'm not saying I'm dissing the mastering people, but I think that we should start paying a lot more attention to the mixing engineers on records. When you take a look at the back of your record, sometimes even in the original pressings, you know, before you start looking up who mastered this record, why don't you look at who mixed this record? You might be pleasantly surprised and might find a connection. Hey, he mixed this record and he mixed this record too, but they both sound great. Maybe there's a reason, you know. So if I sound like I'm standing on a soapbox ranting, yeah, maybe I am a bit, but it's been kind of bugging me for a while. I mean, every video I see is, let's talk about Kevin Gray. Let's talk about, you know, that's all just mastering engineers that we're talking about. And, you know, Bob Ludwig is great. You know, Kevin Gray is great. You know, there's so many that are of good. You know, Chris Bellman, you know, Ryan K. Smith. They're great guys. Even some of my favorite ones like Gilbert Kong from back in the day, who did a lot of the early Rush albums. He mastered them. I'm not taking away their work, but without Terry Brown's mix, Gilbert Kong would have had diddly squat to do. Okay, and here's one more thing I want you to think about. Steven Wilson, and there's a good interview with her on the internet. I mean, try to seek it out. Steven Wilson has said that for most of his records that he's done of his own band, after he mixes it, he doesn't get them mastered. He has never mastered his own albums because he says it's completely pointless. He goes, why would I get somebody in to screw around with the sound of my album after I've just finished mixing it and got it the way I want it to sound? I mean, he could technically do that on his own in the end. He could put a master bus compressor, hit it a bit harder than he normally would, and put a limiter on it to boost up the final sound, and he can get his mix to final levels for pressing easily if he wants to. And I have a feeling that's what he does. So that's that. And also there was an Iron Maiden record. I'm trying to think which one it was. It was one of the middle era ones, like Dance of the Dead or something like that, I believe, where Steve Harris heard one of the mixes of the record and absolutely loved it. It was pressed on a CD for him, like a reference CD. And he told the producer, that's it, I want it released like this. They ended up getting it mastered. They gave it back to Steve Harris and he hated it. And he told him, no, release the versions I heard of just the mix. So there is an Iron Maiden album out there that did not get mastered out there as well. So mastering isn't the be-all end-all. Yes, it's needed. Yes, it's an important thing, but sometimes people don't even use it. Those are the examples I can give you of that. So, in conclusion, the mixing engineers are very important. Let's just put it this way, they are as important as mastering engineers, and I'll leave it at that. So I hope you have a good day. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. Hit the like button; it helps out my channel, and leave a comment. Do you agree with what I'm saying, or do you think I'm completely out of my mind? Leave your comment, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye for now.